How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the Rocky Mountain EDC channel. And today I have another episode in the Versus series. So in the Versus series, I look at pocket knives within companies or brands and between companies or brands. And in this case for today, we have a within company. So we have two knives from the same company or the same brand manufacturer that we're going to be taking in a head-to-head looking at specific categories. Now, it's important to understand that when I pick knives, whether it's a within versus or a between company versus, is that I really try to make sure that I pick a knife or two knives that are similar in their purpose and function, right? It doesn't make sense to have a versus or a real true comparison for which one's better if I were to, example, take a small 2-inch blade slip joint, right, versus a heavy-duty, large 9-inch total knife bushcraft fixed blade, and then took those and put them in a head-to-head for the versus. And I was going to be biased in that comparison and say, I need the knife that's going to be the strongest and the toughest and handle the most things. Well, obviously, the bushcraft knife is going to win. They're completely different knives, completely different categories and use of function, right? So I always try to make sure that my versus series are a respectable comparison. So that's what we're getting into for today. So we're going to be looking at the Benchmade 940 Osborne in just the classic standard model here. And then we're going to be looking at the Benchmade Bugout, which is the CF Elite version. And this is really no different from the standard Benchmade Bugout, other than that the scales are the carbon fiber infused Grivery. So these are just going to be a little stronger and sturdier. Not really changing anything. This is still a fair battle in terms of these two knives. So before I tell you what categories we're going to be using and getting into the actual versus and comparison, please, if you are not already, subscribe to the Rocky Mountain EDC channel, and if you end up enjoying this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that bell notification icon so that you can get updated on when I upload videos. Thanks. All right, so let's get into what we're actually going to be comparing these knives on. So again, we have the Benchmade 940 Osborne and the Benchmade Bugout. So we're going to be looking at the steel, so comparing the steels. And these two knives are meant to be everyday carry knives. So we're really going to be looking at any of these categories in the terms of everyday carry. Now, even that phrase is going to be different for everyone. So some of this comparison is obviously going to be subjective, right? So I'm really going to think about, when I look at these knives, something that is very well-rounded, right? Everyday carry. It's going to be well-rounded. It's not going to be too directed in one specific category. So I'm going to keep that in mind. So we're going to look at the steel, the ergonomics, the Loctite, the handle material, the blade shape, the weight, pocket carry, how the knife deploys, the price, and then lastly, cutting and slicing. So how well does it do knife things, right? Cutting and slicing. That's important to keep in mind. So that's going to be the categories that we're going to look at. So first off, let's get into the steel. This is going to be a really easy comparison because these are both in CPM S30V. So we can see that there. They're both in S30V. Now, because they're the same steel and they're made by the same manufacturer, we can assume that these are both going to be heat treated relatively the same, right? What's going to make these different in terms of how they perform when we look at other categories is the blade profile. So how thick is it behind the edge, the type of grind that it has, the type of blade shape it has. All of those can change how a knife, even though they have the same steel, how they're going to perform differently. So keep that in mind. But for the purpose of looking at the steel, these are the same. So this is going to be a tie in this category. So they both get a check in the steel. Let's check out the ergonomics. Now, these are completely, I wouldn't say completely different ergonomic profiles. I mean, if we look at where the placement of kind of this front portion here to kind of keep your hand from sliding, they're actually very comparable on both knives. The only difference is when we really look at these two knives in terms of the handle, in terms of the ergonomics, right, is this bottom portion down here. So we see that the Benchmade 940 kind of gives a little bit more freedom in larger hands or even gloved hands, right? So you're not forced, like in the Benchmade Bugout, to kind of place your hand right here, right? So you kind of have this drop off portion down here that you can place your pinky. So that kind of changes the ergonomic feel. This kind of feels like your hands and your pinky are supposed to stay down in this portion, where here you can keep it up here or you can choose to choke down like this. So that changes the ergonomic feel. As far as up here for the thumb, there is a slight ramp here on the Benchmade 940 versus the Benchmade Bugout, which is completely flush and flat with the blade. So that's kind of interesting. Honestly, because of the slightly thicker profile on the Benchmade 940 and this option down here and kind of a more kind of ramped up portion on the thumb ramp of this jimping, the Benchmade 940 just feels better in hand. It just feels like my hand's locked in this position in either a hammer fist like this or in a standard cutting position. It just feels comfortable no matter what position I decide to put my hand in, right? The Benchmade Bugout, I mean, it's comfortable, but it's just kind of awkward. So it's not very comfortable in this position. It's not super comfortable in this position. I don't really feel like my hand's locked in. Yeah, it's not bad. It just isn't as good as the 940. So the 940 is going to win on ergonomics. Okay, let's look at the Loctite. Well, this one's easy because they both feature Benchmade's axis locks. They're both going to be very comparable in terms of the general use, right? So how you access the lock, how you use it, how does it lock up? Well, it's going to be going and sliding back behind the tang of the blade in this direction. So rather than being like a liner lock where it goes in this direction, right? It's going to be sliding in this direction. So when we look up in there, it slides up and you have this portion here that's preventing that blade from disengaging. So these are very comparable. The only difference is that the Benchmade 940 has a slightly larger axis bar in the lock, right? And you get a little bit more of this protruding portion of the axis lock to grab onto as opposed to the Benchmade Bugout. So this surprisingly actually changes how it feels to access this portion. Now the Benchmade Bugout's trying to be thin, it's trying to be light, right? So I can see why they decided to keep this a little bit more thinner profile, whereas this one, you know, you have these thumb portions here sticking out a little bit more. So they're relatively the same. This really isn't a hard one, but I'm just gonna say that because the 940 has a larger lock bar, it's gonna be a little bit more sturdy and it gives better access for both, you know, ungloved and gloved hands. That's just gonna be a better lock, even though they have the same Loctite. This sometimes, it's not hard, to manipulate or get, but I could see if you had gloves, it could be a little harder to tell where to grab onto those. Whereas this really protrudes out, you know that you're getting that lock bar. So I'm gonna give the win, even though they have the same, to the Benchmade 940. Okay, so up next, we have handle material. So in this case, we have Benchmade's kind of CF Elite Grivery handles, and then we have their aluminum handle scales on this one. And this is really preference based because both of these handle materials are light. Obviously the CF Elite is going to be far lighter than the aluminum. And it's going to have more of again, a plasticky, kind of very gritty texture to it. Whereas this is going to have a metallic feel. It is coated. Surprisingly, it does have kind of this micro texture to it. It actually feels very grippy. And really, the Benchmade 940 is going to be just about 3 ounces, whereas the Benchmade Bugout is going to be, I believe, 1.8 ounces. So in terms of the lightness of the two knives, this is obviously lighter than the Benchmade 940. As far as handle material, this is really preference based, right? I think that the Benchmade Bugout offers a little bit more grip for that material because it has kind of a small micro milling texture here, and then you have this diamond texture here, whereas this is pretty much smooth other than the small texturing you get with the coating they put on. As far as premiumness and strength, I'm gonna say that they're comparable. But overall, I just think that the Benchmade 940 is gonna have the better handle material. All right, so that kind of brings us into a similar category, and that's going to be weight. As far as EDC goes, I mean, both of these knives offer decent blade length, decent weight. I mean, I don't think that the Benchmade 940 is really, going to weigh you down that much more than the Benchmade Bugout. But as far as, the length of the knife, for the cutting edge, for the handle material, the Benchmade Bugout wins in the weight category for EDC. It's very light, but you get a full-size knife. And I think that's, again, that was the intent of the Bugout. The Benchmade 940 for me, not a problem in the weight, but the Benchmade Bugout is just gonna win in that category because it is a little bit more specialized for that. So the Benchmade Bugout wins in the weight. All right, let's talk about pocket carry. So this, if we talk about the stock pocket clips we get here, we get a deep carry pocket clip on the Bugout and then a standard pocket clip on the Benchmade 940. So the Benchmade Bugout is going to carry a lot deeper in your pocket where the Benchmade 940 is not. As far as everyday carry goes, I think that deep carry pocket clips are a little bit more suitable. Again, you kind of want it staying in your pocket. Deep carry, you don't really want it to be exposed too much. You're not wearing any type of crazy clothing that you're not going to be able to get this out of your pocket. Whereas I can see the quote unquote tactical mindset here for the 940 that you need something to grab onto. If you have gloves on, you have thick clothing, and you need something sticking out so that you don't have a hard time getting this out. I understand that. But as far as an EDC knife, just in their standard forms, the Benchmade Bugout's going to win in the pocket carry, both due to its lightweight and this deep carry pocket clip. All right, so let's talk about deployment. Very similar deployment. However, because of the slight heaviness and length of the 940, it actually swings open with a much smoother action versus the Benchmade Bugout. Very comparable action in terms of deployment and closing, but the 940 just feels a little bit more smooth for that. And also the 940 is not is not coated. So this makes it really easy when we look at the tang here, gliding along the axis bar, right? It's very smooth. Whereas this is a coated blade, even though they have this part, you know, not coated, they did coat the axis lock bar, which made a very interesting interaction with this. And sometimes it can get a little gritty, especially as this breaks in and that coating begins to wear off. So this can sometimes get a little bit more of a gritty action to it. So I'm gonna give deployment to the Benchmade 940. And again, they're both using thumb studs, very comparable, both in good spots. Again, axis lock, we can still, you know, swing the knife open using the axis lock. So, but just in terms of the small, minute details, I'm gonna give it to the Benchmade 940. Next up, we have price. So this is kind of a hard category because Benchmade, obviously, they overprice their knives for what you're really getting. Now, they do have good customer service, right? So a good warranty in terms of, you know, if you break something, if you know, damage the knife, they're gonna repair it, you know, with very little questions asked. One of the best warranties for knife companies. But the price is kind of interesting because we both get similar blade steels, different handle materials, but the Benchmade Bugout is going to run at about 170, 180, while the 940 is going to run, you know, between 216 and 240. So there's definitely a price difference. Now you can argue whether or not, you know, the 940, you know, is it really worth that much more or not? But as far as price and EDC, like, are you going to get plenty of cutting edge on this? Of course you are. I'm going to give the price to the Benchmade Bugout. Even though I think the Bugout is already overpriced, the 940 is even more overpriced. Really, these knives should be about the same price. They should both be, you know, around the $100 mark, if I want to be honest, around the $100 mark, and maybe a $10 price difference, maybe $100, $110, if we're really being honest. But as far as that goes, I mean, the Benchmade Bugout's going to win, even though it's still overpriced. All right, let's talk about cutting and sliciness, quote unquote. So the Benchmade Bugout is going to have a much thinner blade profile. So the thickness behind the edge is going to be very, very thin, right? As opposed to the Benchmade 940. So if we can get that into focus there, we can kind of see the thickness differences here, very obvious. Now, the Benchmade 940 obviously was not trying to be a super slicey knife. It was kind of meant to be a sturdy EDC knife. It was meant to be able to withstand some possible prying and scraping tasks. It was meant to be thicker and stronger. This is going to be a slicier blade, the Benchmade Bugout, by far, right? But how much is sliciness that important? That depends on you. For me, for the cutting tasks I do, I don't need a super duper slicey blade all the time. And I really don't notice that much of a difference. Both of these knives, they cut. The thickness is really not that much of a difference. It's really not that impactful for what I use it for. So I just think in terms of that category, cutting and slicing, you know, it's preference based. I don't really see much of a difference between the two in terms of their capabilities. So that one's going to be a tie. Okay. And we have one category that we did skip, and that is blade shape. Now we have a standard drop point blade shape on the Bugout, and then we have this reverse Tonto blade shape on the 940. So both of these are very versatile blade shapes. Both can be very good for piercing and very good for slicing, because they have a straight edge portion on both, so really good for that pushing and slicing portion, so you get a lot of blade cutting edge. But they also have just enough belly that if you really need to do cutting like this, right, where you don't need to go completely through a material, but you need to cut, but keeping that tip kind of controlled with that belly that gives you that option to slice, they're very comparable. As far as versatility, the Benchmade 940 Osborne, because it has this really precise, drastic drop here, as opposed to this subtle drop on the Bugout, this is going to give you a little bit more versatility, and it is thicker there, so it is going to give a little bit of an added strength. And you can actually use this portion up here for a lot of scraping tasks, and it gives a really nice choke up point to put your thumb up here for good control. Nice flat portion there for control. Just overall really nice in that regard. And of course we have the Bugout, which just a standard blade shape on that. This is completely preference based, but I prefer the reverse tonso. I just think it's versatile. I think it's really good. It pretty much takes everything about a drop point style blade shape, but gives it just that nice, really acute slight drop in the tip, which gives a really good piercing capability that is just really nice as opposed to this, right? So I'm gonna give it to the 940 on blade shape. All right, so that concludes our categories for the comparison. So we're gonna tally them up. Okay, so it looks like the 940 is going to take the win in terms of this versus series. Now, again, this is subjective. This is mostly my opinion. But with all those things kept in mind, I just think that the 940, it's going to take the win in terms of an EDC knife. Now, if we wanted to say what is the best, lightweight backpacking knife that has super duper sliciness, yeah, if we start to change the categories, the Benchmade Bugout is going to win in other categories as opposed to the 940. But as far as just an overall EDC tool, I think the 940 is just going to take the win. Very similar knives, obviously made by the same company, so they're going to have very similar aspects, but the 940 takes the win for me. So again, I hope you guys enjoyed that video. Leave a comment for which one you like better. Do you like the Benchmade 940 better? Or do you like the Benchmade Bugout better? So let me know in the comments which knife you prefer. Do you agree with this versus series? If not, let me know. But again, thanks for watching. Give this video a like and subscribe to the Rocky Mountain EDC channel. Thanks.